From scary dolls to assorted crucifixes and various other paraphernalia, the Warren Museum has a variety of items in their collection. My own personal interest in all things ooky and spooky started when I was researching the Animal doll way back in high school, back when it was a Raggedy Ann doll that not as many knew about. Now, while she doesn't make today's list, let me know in the comments if you folks out there would ever be interested in me talking about my personal creepy doll collection. For now, sit back and enjoy the top 5 demonic idols found in the Warren Occult Museum. In 5th place, we're starting with a lesser known artifact from the Warrens' home. What appears to the innocent eye as nothing but a long black spike, perhaps left over from a construction project of sorts, holds a history of sadness and evil doing. Being the oldest item listed today, its history dates back to its use in the 1700s. While the name of the witch it belonged to has been lost to time, the spike was originally used in a black mass ritual, in an attempt to summon Satan himself to this world. The witch we're speaking of had attempted to curse the stake over the course of her pregnancy, hoping that it would become strong enough to take the soul of her womb in exchange for the devil. During the ritual, she plunged the stake into the flesh as sacrifice, but while it strengthened her relationship with Satan, it did not succeed in bringing him to earth. The stake was passed down as a family heirloom, bringing a feeling of longing and sadness to any that held it, until it was finally acquired by the Warrens. Moving along to 4th place, we're discussing the only item on this list that's made its way to Hollywood: Bathsheba's jewelry box. In January 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange occurrences almost immediately. It started with events that most of us probably wouldn't even register. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to move from place to place on its own. See, I'd personally be chalking that up to my ADHD. 2 young girls of the home began to notice spirits around the house. Carolyn then brought it upon herself to research the history of the home and discovered that it had been in the same family for 8 generations, and that many of them had passed under mysterious or horrible circumstances. The most haunting spirit in the home is that of the witch, Bathsheba Sherman. Fairly well off, Bathsheba and her husband Judson had a son, Herbert L. Sherman, born when Bathsheba was approximately 37 years old. While the couple gave birth to 3 others, they were unable to survive past the age of 7. One of the passings of a neighbor's child in her care drew public attention during a post-mortem examination, when it was determined that the fatal wound was caused by a large sewing needle that had been impaled at the base of the skull. It's believed that Bathsheba took offense to Carolyn moving into what she considered her home and wanted to take back that control. The most notable incident being one afternoon when Carolyn said that she had been lying on the sofa and out of nowhere felt a piercing type of pain in her calf, and then the muscle began to spasm. Upon examination, she noticed a puddle of blood at the point of impact. She checked for bees or anything else that could have caused the puncture in her leg, but found nothing. In her daughter's book, Andrea Perron described the wound as perfectly circle, as if a large sewing needle had impaled her skin. Now, if I were to summarize the entire hell the Perron family endured for the decade that they lived in what they refer to as the Old Arnold Estate, we'd be here for an hour. But during one of the last instances where the Warrens were called in to help the ailing family, they removed the box from the home after thoroughly blessing it, believing that it was acting as a conduit for Bathsheba's demonic energy to affect the home. Moving on to our 3rd place, we have the Conjuring Mirror. Unlike the last artifact on our list, this has nothing to do with the Hollywood franchise. Originally belonging to a 45-year-old New Jersey man named Oliver Birnbaum, it was used to practice a medieval ritual known as speculum, or mirror magic. He performed a lengthy incantation ritual known as a conjuring formula, inviting the spirit world to assist him in manipulating the future. In the beginning, Oliver saw very little in the mirror, other than the movement of blurred forms or quick little incidents that meant nothing to him. But the more he concentrated his attention into the mirror, the more control Oliver gained, and ergo, the more he could see. After performing this ritual obsessively for many months, he got to the point where all he had to do was state what he wanted to see and the desired image would appear, eventually being able to tune into the future whenever he wanted. He gained the ability to project people he didn't like into the mirror, singling them out for punishment or revenge. The unknowing victim would be shown in a future situation, and Oliver would will misfortune to that person, being able to see his justice occur in the mirror just the way he planned it. And while this sounds like a fun projection of one's imagination, these malicious acts would actually be carried out by inhuman spirits. In order to make a victim fall down the stairs, a spirit would either momentarily disorient the person, apport some grease on a step, or go so far as to give the victim a psychokinetic push. Eventually, Oliver neglected the part of the ritual where he had to give homage to Satan, and as a result, the evil he proposed for others began to occur to him, along with the spirits that he turned loose on his enemies, now infesting his own home instead. After about a week of torture, this man was so terrified that he called a prominent Catholic official official and begged him to send a demonologist to his house. When the Warrens arrived at the address, they met a man frightened out of his wits, and rightfully so. Doors were opening and closing by themselves. Every minute something would crash and break or bounce off a wall and smash. Ed was able to reverse the ritual originally enacted by Oliver and bless the house, stopping the disturbance. As the Warrens were about to depart, Oliver insisted that they take the mirror with them, and the 5-foot-tall antique now lives in their museum. In second place, we have the black lace veil. Now, while I obviously love the idea of a cute gothy aesthetic, this is anything but. After one of their public lectures, Ed was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where the boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some occult influence. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside of her. When Lorraine walked over to join the group, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everyone in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately, before Ed escorted the couple to an offstage room, but Lorraine stayed outside. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy had talked about. After about 10 minutes, the possession passed, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last 3 months, a symptom that is common in possession. She went on to share her background. She was a girl wealthy enough to buy whatever she wanted, but money can't always buy love. Originally, her now boyfriend Alan had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, and she had resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling tools to help with witchcraft, purchasing there a book on the black arts, and later that night performing a ritual for acquiring lovers. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns before renouncing God and her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, finishing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal life force. You know, simple stuff. About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her entitled world perfect. What she hadn't counted on, however, was that she was in debt to the demonic, having given them permission to enter her life. Ed knew immediately that Lonnie would have to undergo an exorcism as soon as possible, and made contact with a priest the next morning, who was able to come and assist with the procedure. Upon arrival, the priest insisted on testing the spirit. He instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross 6 inches behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away! It burns! Take it away!" During the exorcism, it kept screaming, she's mine, her soul is mine," in reference to Lonnie. It was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, the thing vowed it would return to another. The Warrens brought the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and the Conjuring book home with them so she would be safe from repossession. But the tale of the veil doesn't end here. Ed received a phone call one day from a man named John Rand, who wanted him to meet his daughter Charlene, who he explained possessed a natural knowledge of what he took to be witchcraft. When she stared at people, even when they weren't aware of it, she'd fill their mind with inhuman terror. John called Ed specifically because Charlene was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, and some that couldn't even be called human, but all making extremely threatening statements to John and his wife. Upon bringing Charlene to various doctors and clergymen, they recommended John be put in contact with Ed, and Ed agreed to have the girl and her father visit his home the next weekend. When Ed attempted to shake Charlene's hand upon meeting her, she backed away and stared distressfully at him, keeping track of every move he made. His attempts to question her resulted in no-end answers, and her eyes began to wander about the room in boredom. When they landed on the black veil, Charlene jumped up, grabbed the veil, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature distinct from this otherwise attractive girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer Charlene, but an inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for now a second time. These items have since been locked away in the museum. And finally, in first place, we have the Ouija board recovered from the Donovan household. 15-year-old Patty Donovan came across the Ouija board and decided to use it to find a friend. From the first yes in response to her queries, Patty was hooked. She spent months falling in love with a spirit she believed to be in love with her, telling it intimacies about her everyday life. After about a year of telling all of her secrets to the board, Patty had become emotionally dependent on the spirit, asking it one night to reveal her future. During the very long session, it laid out a scenario of Patty's life for the next 6 years, providing specific details, right down to the date of the birth of her first child and the fact that she would have a total of 3 children by 1978. All information that would eventually prove true. Being as dependent as she was, on the evening of March 2nd, Patty now pleaded for the spirit to manifest. The next morning, Theodore Donovan found the spark plug wires pulled out of his car, the rubber hoses unfastened, and the fan belt cut out when he was attempting to start his vehicle. Not much later, Patty attempted to start her car. It was discovered later that the internal engine had been completely disassembled. That week, other incidents of apparent vandalism occurred around the Donovan house. Foundation shrubs were yanked out of the ground, roots and all. On the roof, a 6-foot cast iron pipe, which held electrical wires, was found bent at a 90-degree angle. On Friday, March 8th, Ted marked one flat on the kitchen calendar. No sooner did Patty get her car back from the shop than one of her other tires lost air. The next day, Saturday, her father made the same entry on the calendar, although this time it seemed the tire had been cut with a knife. In the meantime, Patty could no longer raise her invisible boyfriend on the Ouija board. Night after night, she tried to communicate, but the planchette would simply slide over to goodbye. She had no idea that her ethereal beau had actually manifested in the form of a supernatural vandal. By the second week of March, material damage to the house and cars had become so troublesome that Ted had complained to the police. When they arrived, he pointed out the destruction done to the garden plants and shrubs, the exterior of the house, and the apparent intrusion into a locked garage to puncture the tires and tear engines apart. Before leaving, the policeman assured Ted that they'd keep an eye on the property during night patrols. Later that second week, after work, Ted and his wife Ellen were sitting in the kitchen with their son Brian when all three heard something smash against a wall somewhere inside the house. Cautiously moving to investigate, they found a gaping 18-inch hole in the plasterboard wall in Brian's room. Just as upsetting was the fact that the jagged edges of the plasterboard were pointing inwards, with the blow coming from inside the walls. Listening in the dark that night, Ted heard the sound of a board being pried loose, but after checking the entire house thoroughly, found no loose boards. The house was further plagued by loud noises every night that only escalated in frequency and volume, along with further unexplainable damage to the walls. On April 1st, furniture began to levitate, with a 250-pound dresser flinging its contents while flying erratically. Rocks had also begun to rain from the sky, pelting only the Donovan house, which the police bore witness to. Ted eventually broke down at work and explained the horror of his to his supervisor, who urged him to reach out to the Warrens. Ted instead tried moving his family into a hotel at first, and the spirits followed the family there, destroying the room and making so much noise that the family was thrown out of the hotel and forced to return home. Finally contacting Ed and Lorraine, they arrived in Maine as quickly as they were able to, finding the home in complete disarray. Lorraine said nothing, although at the time she sensed in the home the presence of entities so numerous and threatening that she had to fight with herself to keep from going back outside. After a lengthy tour of the house, Ed and Lorraine conducted an interview with the entire family, where Patty's history with the Ouija board was revealed. The Warrens then contacted the Catholic Church to begin the process for an exorcism to be granted, which sadly took a month. The family experienced many more unexplainable horrors during that time. Oh, let me know in the comments if you'd like me to go through their entire story in another video. After the exorcism took place on May 2nd, the family was finally free of the demonic torment, but left with over $5,000 in damages to their home, which would be over $30,000 in today's money. And now that I'm wishing I lived for my old cross necklace in my jewelry box this morning, that's the end of our list. Honestly, with all of the artifacts the Warrens have collected over the years and the details they've shared with the public, it was a struggle to narrow it down for today. Let me know in the comments if I should share more, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more demonic content. From us here at Top 5 Scary Videos.